Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu, and I'm here with a Digimon deck profile. So today I'm going to be covering the Digimon deck of what I like to call black blockers. So the whole idea of the deck is essentially to use the blocking mechanic to stop the opponent's attacks, and then pair that up with the reboot mechanic or ways to make your blockers active, so that way we could both attack and defend basically at the same time. I know it's not exactly at the same time, but you get the idea. So I think this deck is pretty fun, so let's just dive right into the deck. So first, let's start off with the Digitama. I'm going to be using Kapurimon because he gives our reboots plus 1000 DP, and he is just probably our preferred base because obviously we want to have our Digimon have a reboot. And then Tsumemon is the secondary Digitama because having Digimon with the same name, giving the Digimon plus 2000 DP isn't necessarily bad, and it's just the 5th Digitama. You don't necessarily need to run Tsumemon, I'm just running him as the 5th Digitama. Next, onto the rookies, I'm running Hagurumon because he is basically just the efficiency vanilla. Next, I'm running Gotsumon because he is actually one of the few rookies with the blocker mechanic. So that way we can start trying to wall the opponents out with a smaller blocker, and if we really need to have a blocker on field, he is relatively cheap to play. I'm running ToyAgumon because he is the primary Digimon we want to Digivolve with, because he has the inheritable ability of Reboot, so he will give whatever he Digivolves into Reboot. And then the last rookie of the deck is going to be Gabumon. Gabumon is in there for the blue tech that I'm going to be running. Essentially, he also has a when played, we get to draw a card, and the deck is currently lacking a little bit of card draw, so having him not only on the field to help us play our blue option cards is good, but the fact that we don't need to Digivolve or care about Digivolving with him is also pretty good. Next, on to the champions. So the first champion I'm going to be running is going to be Greymon because of his inheritable ability, where if the Digimon has Reboot, it will also get jamming. So jamming will make it so that the security check doesn't really matter and will always win. So that way we could feel safe about attacking with our blockers. And then the last champion that I'm going to be running is going to be Guardromon. So Guardromon is a blocker. He does have the downside of not attacking, but he is probably the best champion blocker in the game currently because he has 7,000 DP where all of the others have 6,000 DP. So he can be a really hard early wall for the opponent to try to deal with. Next, as far as our ultimates go, I'm going to be running Andromon because he inherently has blocker, so if we pair that up with the evolution combo from ToyAgumon and Greymon, then he becomes a reboot blocker with jamming, which is already pretty good. And if we just need another blocker out, then he also just is another blocker. Or if we need to evolve Guardromon in order to start swinging, then that is also a very viable option. So he's in there just because the blocker keyword and all of the different options that we have on how we want to play him. And then the last ultimate I'm going to be running is going to be MetalGreymon. So MetalGreymon inherently has Reboot, which is okay. It can matter a little bit, but for the most part it doesn't really matter. What really matters is his inheritable ability, where if the Digimon has Reboot, it also gets security attack +1. So obviously pair that up with Greymon, and the Digimon he's Digivolving into will have jamming and security attack +1. So that means it'll hit 2 security. And then as far as Megas go, I'm going to be running WarGreymon because he has Blocker and Reboot, and he is primarily what we're going to be using to aggro with. So obviously you are going to want to Digivolve him on top of the Greymons, so that way he can become a jamming security attack +1 blocker Reboot, which can be pretty powerful for the opponent to deal with. On top of which, if we just need to play the card, having a big mega blocker with Reboot just alone is not a very bad thing if you are forced into a corner and have to do that. And then the last mega that I'm going to be running is Machinedramon. So Machinedramon is another mega that has blocker, but he's one that we primarily don't want to digivolve with because of his when played effect. So his when played effect is you get to choose 2 of your opponent's Digimon and de-digivolve them too, which is basically reverting them to a weaker state, so that way your wall of blockers will become even harder for the opponent to deal with and get through. And then as far as options go, I'm just running a fairly simple options package. So Lightning Blade is in there in case we need to give the DP buff to one of our Digimon for a little bit of an aggressive push, but ideally we want to use its security effect to make one of our blockers become active. Atomic Ray is in there for a very similar reason. Its main effect is changing one of my blocker Digimon to active, so that way we could kind of give essentially a one-turn reboot to them, and then all of your Digimon with blockers become active and get plus 5000 DP until the end of the turn as its security effect, so that way it makes it harder for the opponents to continue the aggression with all of our blockers basically becoming active and being able to block with a sizable power boost. Giga Cannon is a pretty solid removal card in which one of your opponent's Digimon basically de-digivolves 4, so we're going to be obviously trying to target their Mega to revert it down to a weaker state, and its security effect is basically activating its main effect. As far as some of the blue options go that we're running, I'm choosing to run River of Power because pair that up with de-digivolving the opponent's Digimon all the way down to ideally a level 3. We could use River of Power to bounce up to 3 of our opponent's level 3s back to the hand and discard all Digivolution sources from it, so discarding the Digitama if they have any on it. But this card is also pretty useful in case someone is trying to Rookie Rush aggro you out and you can't get enough blocking Digimon out. This definitely helps with being aggroed out. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any security effects, but I think the card is really, really strong on its own and has some decent synergy with the deck. And then the other blue option card I'm going to be running as some tech is going to be Ice Wolfclaw, because it is just another removal card where you basically bounce one of your opponent's Digimon back to the hand and removing all of its Digivolution sources. Again, just removal is really good, and I think Ice Wolfclaw is pretty solid because of how anti-tempo it is. So obviously if you're going to be bouncing a Mega back to the opponent's hand, not only are they going to have to try to replay that Mega somehow, but that's also going to cost them some memory, so that way you could swing it back into your favor, and it's just a very solid anti-tempo removal card. And then as far as Tamers go, I'm going to be running Tai, because at the start of your turn, if your memory is 2, it becomes 3, so this way it helps fix a little bit of memory deficiency in case your opponent is trying to leave you with very little memory to work with, because some of our cards can be pretty expensive to play. On top of which, it also has an added benefit of during my opponent's turn, all of my black Digimon get plus 1000 DP, so it makes our blockers that much stronger. And then the other tamer of the deck is going to be the Matt from the starter deck, because the opponent can't always have a Digimon with Digivolution sources, and this will also help fix our memory, on top of which it is a very low-costed tamer card, so it's very easy and efficient to play, and it also will help turn on all of our blue options. This combined with Gabumon allows us to use our blue options. And then you could run some other variants of the deck in terms of tech splashes. I feel like the black package is pretty solid enough as its own, but in terms of other options that you could run, Monemon is really good because he is another rookie with blocker, and you could digivolve him into Grizzlymon, which is another blocking Digimon. Vulcan's Hammer is good for memory efficiency. Wolfclaw is pretty solid because it allows you to separate a Digivolution source. So ideally, if Guardromon is a Digivolution source, you would probably want to use this to split out the Guardromon, so that way you can have an additional blocker. V-Nova Blast is pretty good just because one of the Digimon will get jamming. And Emerald Blaze is also another pretty decent option because it's your standard buff, but its security effect is drawing a card and adding this card into your hand. You could even think about splashing red in the deck if you want, where you could run the red Tai on top of the black Tai, and the red Tai just gives all of the Digimon a plus 1000 power boost during your turn, so it allows you to have a slightly better aggressive push, on top of letting you use your red option cards if you don't have a red Digimon out. Agumon is a pretty good red Digimon to splash in because he can help dig for your Tamer cards, and your Tamer cards are really important. On top of which, he's just a pretty solid base, and we could Digivolve him into Guardromon because he is just another blocker. And then red also has a decent slew of different options that you could use. So Brave Shield allows you to make a blocker. Terraforce is probably one of the best removal cards in the game, where it straight up destroys the opponent's Digimon. Giga Blast is another removal card. Volcanic Flame is another removal card. And then Nuclear Laser is a really decent option because it allows us to draw 2 and gives one of our Digimon plus 2000 DP until the end of the turn, allowing us to help with our more aggressive push. But drawing 2 is pretty important considering the deck does have a slight lack of card draw. So that is it for the Black Blockers deck. I think this deck is going to be a pretty solid deck. It's definitely a really fun deck to play because of just all of the different aggressive and defensive options it has available to it. And it definitely has a lot of flexibility in terms of a splash package in order to kind of further customize it. So that's kind of it for this video. As always, I'll have the deck list in the description below. Feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions about the deck or just want to leave a comment in general. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content, and I will see you in the next video.